Today, Nally Elementary would like to recognize all of our February Leaders of the Month. We are so proud of these students for their outstanding leadership in the classroom, on the playground, in the lunchroom, and also always displaying the 7 habits at Nolly School. Today, I will recognize each student in each grade level and tell you a little something about them. Our first student in kindergarten is Holden Robertson in Mrs. Parton's room, who begins with the end in mind. Mrs. Parton said Holden is excited about learning and loves to be with his friends. We made it a goal to balance fun and when it's time to focus and work hard. He is working hard towards this goal and gets stronger at it every day. Keep up the hard work, Holden. In Mrs. Craig's room, we have Lily Hostetler. Lily was nominated by Mrs. Craig and Mrs. Tucker. They said she is proactive and puts first things first. Lily has been making great strides this year in both Mrs. Craig and Mrs. Tucker's classes. Lily demonstrates our 3 R's of being a leader. She is ready, respectful, and responsible. In Mrs. Rankin's room, we have Logan Lloyd, who is proactive. Mrs. Rankin said, Logan has begun to show signs of self-control and regulating his actions. He is a friendly boy who has a lot of energy. We are so proud of his steps to success. Keep doing your best, Logan. You're doing great. In Mrs. Zukowski's room, we have Mirko Mahalovic, who is being proactive. Mirko has made learning to read a big rock. He's been practicing sight words, tapping out words, and reading books independently. Mirko's hard work and determination has helped him grow as a kindergartner and as a reader. Way to go, Mirko. Okay, now in first grade, our first student is from Mrs. Beard's class, and is Lucia Simons, who begins with the end in mind. Lucia has been working so hard at taking charge of her day and focusing on the positive. Mrs. Beard said, I'd love to hear her walk in the morning and say, I'm going to have a good day today. I am so proud of you, Lucia. Keep it up. In Mrs. Bowser's room, we have Steele Vinson, who demonstrates all habits. Mrs. Bowser said Steele is an outstanding leader in our classroom. He is kind, caring, and helpful to all of his classmates. He sets his own academic goals and works hard to achieve them. Way to go, Steele. In Mrs. Fiesler's room, we have Cameron Falenga, who puts first things first. Mrs. Fiesler said Cameron demonstrated the important character trait of honesty. Cameron was playing teacher at recess and accidentally marked on our Heggerty book. Instead of hiding it, she came to me and showed me and apologized. Another day, she found a copying good on her desk because I thought she earned it the day before for clipping up to pink. Cameron explained that she was only on purple the day before so that she shouldn't take it. We know it's not always easy to be honest, but it's always right. We are so proud of you and your good character, Cameron. In Mrs. Rector's room, we have Megan Lehman, who demonstrates all of the 7 habits. Mrs. Rector said Megan exhibits all 7 habits in the first grade classroom. She said we recently welcomed a new student to our classroom. Megan had a small gift and made a card for our new student on her very first day. Your random act of kindness helped our new student on her first day. Thank you, Megan. Okay, moving on to second grade, our first student is in Mrs. Grandin's class, Renly Sedgwick, who puts first things first. Renly is really putting first things first. She has read the most hours at home the last 2 months. She comes in each day with a smile on her face and gets right to work. She is really learning and growing because of all of her hard work. In Mrs. Slimak's class, we have Parker McAleese, who begins with the end in mind and puts first things first. Parker works so hard. He is determined and knows how to set goals. Each day he comes to class with a get-it-done attitude. He is disciplined and continues to work towards the 100-mile group for walking club. Keep up your hard work, Parker. In Mrs. Truex's class, we have Cecilia Lemmo, who is proactive. Cecilia takes initiative and is a responsible person. She plans ahead, and this is an important part of our classroom, and she contributes to our school mission. She gets along with others and works well in groups. Keep it up, Cecilia. In Mrs. Van Dorsten's room, we have Hannah Smith, who puts first things first. Hannah is such a hard worker. She always tries her best and participates in class. She is friendly and helpful with her classmates. Way to go, Hannah. Keep up the good work. In third grade, our first student is Melania Prinzo in Mrs. Esterly's room, who is proactive. Melania sets a great example of how someone can be proactive. With her calm demeanor, she takes on extra work to make sure she is on track. Melania never gives up and finds ways to prioritize her goals. In Mrs. Braley's room, we have Bryn Strader, who is proactive. Mrs. Braley said since Christmas break, Bryn has a can-do attitude and she tries her best in finding evidence for her answers in reading. She said she can see many more accomplishments in her future if she continues to have this grit. In Mr. Straub's room, we have Lane Johnson, who puts first things first. Lane is not the fastest worker, but he is very thoughtful and a mindful worker. His answers and responses are thought out and thorough. Keep up your great work, Lane. In Mrs. Stasness' class, we have Eva Anderson, who thinks win-win. Mrs. Stasness said, this month our class voted for the leader of the month, and it goes to Eva Anderson. Some of her friends said Eva always starts the day with a story to tell. She is kind and fair to everyone. I definitely agree. Eva is a quiet voice that pulls everyone back to working as a team. Thank you, Eva. Owen Shambo is being recognized by Mrs. Melville. Mrs. Melville said Owen Shambo demonstrates synergizing by having good manners. He says thank you often and does his best to be polite, knowing that this is the way to get along with others. Thank you, Owen. Okay, and finally, our fourth grade leaders of the month. Our first student is being recognized by Mrs. Gardner and Mrs. Hansel. It is Millie Spignardi, who seeks first to understand. Mrs. Hansel and Mrs. Gardner said Millie is such a good listener in class. We can always count on Millie to follow directions, have supplies ready, and get her work done. Thanks for being a leader in room 120. In Mrs. Oaks' room, we have Audrey Flynn. Audrey doesn't waste time. She prioritizes correctly and doesn't avoid the challenging task. She is driven by what she knows is important and isn't influenced by people around her. Way to be a leader, Audrey. In Mrs. Matson's room, we have Kaylee Centifonti, who synergizes. Kaylee is new to Nolly this year, but she sure fits in well, and she has become a friend to all. She is very willing to help others when needed and works well in groups. She also took another new student under her wing to get settled in and help them feel welcome. Keep being a good leader, Kaylee. In Mrs. Toast's room, we have Costa Lazik, who is proactive. Costa is proactive as a fourth grader. He is always ready to work each day. More than just being ready, he is usually ahead of the game. Costa works hard to be prepared, taking school very seriously. Thank you for setting high standards for us all. Way to go. In Mrs. Melville's room, it is Trent Williams who sharpens the saw. Mrs. Melville said, Trent always demonstrates sharpen the saw by always departing company with a heartfelt farewell. He makes everyone happy that they have spent time with him. Congratulations to all of the Nolly Leaders of the Month. The entire staff here at Nolly is so proud of you. Please keep up the great work and your outstanding leadership. Way to go!